The salt air cut through my jacket as I walked down Harbor Street, carrying a small wrapped box that contained the only decent thing I could afford, a silver picture frame from the antique shop near the docks. It wasn't much, but Grandma Ellie had always said it was the thought that counted, not the price tag. At 27, I should have been able to buy her something better, but freelance photography in a dying fishing town didn't exactly pay the bills. I'd been expecting to drive to her little blue house on Maple Street, the one with the white picket fence and the garden she tended with religious devotion. Instead, my mother's casual phone call that morning had left me reeling. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She's at Sunset Manor now, Noah. It's for the best. No discussion, no warning. Just a fact delivered like the weather report. Sunset Manor squatted on the hill overlooking the harbor like a concrete afterthought, all beige stucco and narrow windows that seemed designed to keep the world out rather than let light in. The parking lot was half empty, marked with faded lines that hadn't been repainted in years. As I pushed through the glass doors, the smell hit me immediately. Industrial disinfectant trying and failing to mask something deeper and more unpleasant. The lobby attempted cheerfulness with artificial flowers and motivational posters, but the effect was like putting lipstick on a corpse. A receptionist with tired eyes barely looked up as I signed the visitor log. "Eleanor Morgan, room 237, I said. She gestured toward a hallway lined with wheelchairs and walkers, their occupants staring at nothing in particular. The elevator wheezed to the second floor, and I followed the numbered doors past rooms where televisions played too loudly and nurses moved with the brisk efficiency of people with too much to do. Room 237 was at the end of the hall, and when I knocked, Grandma Ellie's voice called out, weaker than I remembered. "Come in." She was sitting in a chair by the window, looking smaller than she had just 3 months ago at Christmas. Her silver hair, once carefully styled, hung limp around her shoulders. But her eyes still sparkled when she saw me. "Noah, honey." She reached out with shaking hands, and I knelt beside her chair to accept the embrace that still smelled like lavender despite everything. "I wasn't sure you'd remember." "Remember your birthday? Grandma, come on!" I pulled back to study her face, noting the way her cheekbones seemed more prominent, her skin paper-thin. "How are you feeling?" "Oh, you know. Getting old isn't for sissies, as they say." I looked around the room, barely larger than my studio apartment, furnished with a narrow bed, a small dresser, and 2 chairs. The walls were bare, except for a single photograph I'd taken of the harbor at sunset, which she'd insisted on framing years ago. "Where are your things? Your books? Your quilts?" "They said there wasn't room for everything. Victoria thought it would be better to keep things simple." The way she said my mother's name carried a weight I'd never heard before. I handed her the wrapped box, and she opened it with the careful attention she'd always given my childhood gifts, no matter how humble. When she saw the frame, her face lit up. "It's beautiful, Noah. Just beautiful." She held it up to catch the afternoon light. "What picture should I put in this?" "Whatever makes you happy." She was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the harbor below. "I can see the docks from here. Sometimes I watch the boats come in, and remember when your grandfather used to take me down there to buy fresh lobster right off the boats." "Why didn't you tell me you were moving?" The question came out harsher than I intended. Her shoulders sagged slightly. "Victoria said it would be easier this way. Less fuss." She looked at me with eyes that held too much understanding. "She's busy, Noah. You're busy. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden. You never have been." She patted my hand. "You always were my favorite photographer. Still taking pictures?" "When I can find work." I didn't mention the stack of unpaid bills on my desk, or the fact that the local paper had just cut my monthly retainer in half. "Good. The world needs people who see beauty in it." A nurse appeared in the doorway, a young man with kind eyes and scrubs that had seen better days. "Sorry to interrupt. Time for evening medications, Mrs. Morgan." Grandma Ellie sighed. "Noah, this is Raphael. He's been very kind to me." Raphael nodded at me politely. "You're the photographer grandson she's always talking about. Guilty as charged. She's shown me your pictures. You've got a real eye." After Raphael left with a small paper cup of pills, I stayed another hour, listening to Grandma tell me about her new routine. Breakfast at 7, activities at 10, lunch at noon, dinner at 5. It sounded like prison, with better medical care. As visiting hours ended, I kissed her forehead and promised to come back soon. "Don't worry about me, honey," she said, but there was something in her voice that suggested I should do exactly that. Walking back to my truck in the fading light, I couldn't shake the image of her sitting alone in that sterile room, staring out at a harbor she could see but no longer touch. The woman who taught me to love stories, who'd encouraged my photography when everyone else called it a hobby, who'd been my safe harbor in every storm. She deserved better than this. I sat in the parking lot for a long time, gripping the steering wheel and trying to make sense of the anger building in my chest. Victoria had made this decision without consulting me, without considering what Grandma wanted, without even warning me it was happening. "For the best," she'd said. But best for who? The next evening, I called Grandma from my apartment above Murphy's Bait and Tackle. The smell of low tide drifted through my open window, and I could hear the creaking of boats in the harbor below. It was a sound that usually comforted me, but tonight it made me think of Grandma watching the same harbor from her institutional window. "How was your day?" I asked, settling into the ancient armchair I'd bought at a garage sale. "Oh, the usual excitement. Bingo at 2, pudding at 4. I'm living the dream." "Are you eating enough? You looked thin yesterday." "The food's fine, dear. Nothing like my own cooking, but fine. Though I did have the strangest thing happen. I got a credit card statement in the mail, and there are charges on there I don't remember making." I sat up straighter. "What kind of charges?" "Let me see. There's something from an electronics store in Portland, $90, and something called Premium Goods online for $230. I haven't bought anything online in my life, Noah. I barely know how to turn on the computer you got me." "Did you call the credit card company?" "I mentioned it to one of the nurses, and she said not to worry about it. Said that Victoria was handling my finances now and probably just forgot to tell me about some purchases for my comfort here." Grandma's voice carried a note of confusion. "But I can't think of anything I needed that would cost that much." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Grandma, you still have your credit cards with you?" "Well, yes, but the nurse, Linda, I think her name is, she said I shouldn't worry about money matters anymore. Said it would just cause me stress." She sounded smaller suddenly. "Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm getting forgetful." "You're not forgetful. Your mind is sharp as ever." I grabbed a pen and started taking notes. "Can you read me those charges again?" She went through the statement line by line. Electronics, online purchases, even a charge from a jewelry store in Bangor. All purchases that made no sense for an 82-year-old woman who'd been moved to a nursing home against her will. "Grandma, I want you to keep those statements safe, okay? Don't let anyone take them or tell you to throw them away." "You sound worried." "I'm just looking out for you, like you always looked out for me." After we hung up, I spread my notes across the small table that served as both desk and dining room. The charges were too specific, too expensive to be simple mistakes. And the fact that someone at the nursing home had told Grandma not to worry about the finances raised red flags I couldn't ignore. I thought about Victoria, about her carefully manicured appearance and her obsession with looking successful, about how she'd moved Grandma without discussion, as if she were disposing of an inconvenient piece of furniture. My phone buzzed with a text from Max Holloway, my best friend since high school, and the only person in town who knew more about computers than I did. "Beer and terrible pizza at Rico's. You buyin'?" I texted back, Need your help with something. Can you trace credit card purchases? What kind of trouble are you in now? Not me, my grandmother. Say no more, Rico's in 20. Rico's Pizza occupied a narrow storefront on Main Street, the kind of place that survived on nostalgia and the fact that it was the only restaurant open past 9 o'clock. Max was already in our usual booth, her laptop open beside a pitcher of beer and a pizza that looked like it had been assembled by someone wearing a blindfold. "So, what's the story?" she asked as I slid into the booth. I told her everything. The sudden move to the nursing home, Grandma's confusion about the charges, the nurse's odd advice about not worrying about finances. Max listened without interruption, her fingers already dancing across the keyboard. She said, "Give me those numbers." I read off the charges from my notes, and she pulled up websites, cross-referenced addresses, traced digital footprints with the kind of expertise that came from running the town's only computer repair shop. "Okay, this is interesting," she said after 20 minutes. "That electronics store charge, it's for a tablet and wireless headphones. Premium stuff. The online purchase is from a site that sells designer handbags and jewelry. And get this," she turned the laptop so I could see the screen. "The shipping address for most of these purchases isn't the nursing home. It's a P.O. box here in town." "Whose P.O. box?" "That's harder to find out, but I've got a few tricks." Her fingers flew over the keys again. "The jewelry store charge is the most interesting, though. It's not for a purchase, it's for a consignment. Someone sold jewelry to them and got paid through your grandmother's credit card." The suddenly tasted like cardboard. Someone's using her cards to convert stolen goods into cash? That would be my guess. Max closed the laptop and leaned back. "Noah, this isn't just confusion or forgetfulness. Someone is systematically stealing from your grandmother." I stared out the window at the empty street, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders like snow. Somewhere in this small town, someone was preying on Grandma Ellie, using her trust and vulnerability to line their own pockets. What do I do? We start by finding out who has access to her credit cards and personal information, and we document everything. If this is what I think it is, you're going to need proof. Outside, the fog was rolling in from the harbor, wrapping around the streetlights and making the familiar look strange and threatening. I thought about Grandma alone in her room at Sunset Manor, trusting the people who were supposed to care for her, not knowing that someone was slowly stealing her life away, one charge at a time. "Max," I said, "I think I'm going to need your help for more than just tracing credit cards." She grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." I showed up at Sunset Manor the next afternoon without calling ahead, hoping to catch things as they really were, rather than as they wanted me to see them. The same tired receptionist barely looked up as I signed in, and I made my way to Grandma's room with my camera bag slung over my shoulder, a habit that had become as natural as breathing. The hallway seemed quieter today, with most residents napping in their rooms. I passed a woman in a wheelchair talking to herself, and an elderly man standing by a window, dressed in a bathrobe and staring at something only he could see. When I reached room 237, I found Raphael changing Grandma's bedsheets. She was sitting in her chair by the window, and her face brightened when she saw me. "2 visits in 3 days," she said. "People will talk." "Let them." I kissed her cheek and noticed she seemed more alert today. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Raphael brought me some real tea from the kitchen instead of that bag nonsense they usually serve." Raphael looked up from smoothing the sheets. "She was telling me about her garden. Sounds like you had quite the green thumb, Mrs. Morgan." "Still do, I hope," Grandma said wistfully. "I keep thinking about my roses. They'll need pruning soon." "What happened to your house?" I asked. Her face clouded. "Victoria said it was too much for me to maintain. She put it up for sale before—" She gestured around the room. "Before all this." My jaw clenched. Another decision made without consultation, another piece of Grandma's life stripped away in the name of practicality. Raphael finished with the bed and gathered up the used linens. "I'll let you two visit," he said. But as he passed by me, he spoke quietly. "Could I talk to you for a minute, outside?" I followed him into the hallway, wondering what was important enough to interrupt visiting time. "Look," Raphael said, glancing around to make sure we were alone. "I probably shouldn't say anything, but your grandmother's a sweet lady, and I can tell you care about her." "What's wrong?" He shifted the bundle of linens in his arms. "Have you noticed anything missing from her room? Personal belongings?" I thought about the bare walls, the absence of her quilts and books. She said there wasn't room for everything. "Right, but I've been working here 8 months, and I've seen this before." He lowered his voice. "Residents come in with jewelry, family heirlooms, things that matter to them. Gradually, those things disappear. Administration says they're being kept safe or that families requested them, but what? Your grandmother had a beautiful necklace when she arrived. Pearls with a silver clasp. She told me it was her mother's. I noticed it was gone last week." I remembered the necklace. Grandma had worn it to every family gathering, every special occasion. It was one of the few things she had left of her own mother. "Where do you think it went?" Raphael looked uncomfortable. "I don't know, but I do know that our administrator, Kendra Lawson, has very specific ideas about what residents should and shouldn't keep in their rooms. Says valuables are a theft risk." "Theft by who?" "That's what I'd like to know." He adjusted his grip on the linens. "Look, I need this job. My aunt has medical bills and this place pays better than most. But some things that happen here, they don't sit right with me." "What kind of things?" Before he could answer, a woman's voice cut through the hallway. "Raphael, is there a problem?" I turned to see a well-dressed woman in her 40s approaching us. She had the kind of polished appearance that suggested she was more comfortable in boardrooms than hallways. Perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive-looking blazer, shoes that clicked authoritatively on the linoleum floor. "No problem, Miss Lawson," Raphael said quickly. "Just chatting with Mrs. Morgan's grandson." Kendra Lawson extended a hand to me with a professional smile. "You must be Noah. Your grandmother speaks of you often. I'm Kendra, the administrator here." Her handshake was firm, her eye contact steady, but something about her presence made me want to step back. Maybe it was the way Raphael had tensed up the moment she appeared, or the calculated quality of her smile. "How are you finding your grandmother's care?" she asked. "She seems to be adjusting," I said carefully. "Good. The transition to assisted living can be difficult, but we pride ourselves on making residents feel at home." Her smile never wavered. "Of course, family members sometimes find the adjustment challenging too. It's natural to worry, but I assure you, Eleanor is in excellent hands." "I'm sure she is." "If you have any concerns, please don't hesitate to bring them to me directly. We believe in open communication." She glanced at Raphael. "Don't let me keep you from your duties." Raphael nodded and headed down the hallway with his armload of linens. I watched him go, noting the rigid set of his shoulders. "He's a good worker," Kendra said, following my gaze. "Very dedicated, sometimes almost too dedicated. He tends to get emotionally involved with the residents. We have to remind him about professional boundaries." The warning was subtle, but clear. Don't listen to Raphael. Don't ask questions. Don't make trouble. "Well," I said, "I should get back to my grandmother." "Of course. Please give Eleanor my regards." I returned to room 237 feeling like I'd just had a conversation full of subtext I didn't quite understand. Grandma was dozing a fact in her chair, and I sat quietly, studying the room with new eyes. The dresser held only a few toiletries and a small stack of magazines. No jewelry box, no family photos except the one I'd taken, No books, though she'd always been a voracious reader. The woman who had filled her house with treasures from a lifetime of teaching and traveling now lived in a space that looked more like a hotel room than a home. When she stirred awake, I asked gently, "Grandma, what happened to your pearl necklace, the one from your mother?" Her hand went automatically to her throat, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "Oh, that. Kendra said it would be safer in the office safe. She was worried about theft." Grandma's voice held a note of doubt. "I suppose she's right, but I do miss wearing it." "When was the last time you saw it?" She frowned, thinking. "It's been... well, I'm not sure. Time moves differently here." I stayed until evening, talking about photography, about the harbor, about anything except the growing suspicion that Grandma Ellie was being systematically robbed by the people who were supposed to protect her. As I walked to the parking lot, I saw Raphael sitting in an old Honda Civic, smoking a cigarette and staring at the harbor. I tapped on his window, and he rolled it down. "What were you going to tell me before Kendra showed up?" He took a long drag on his cigarette and exhaled slowly. "You really want to know?" "Yes." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Then meet me at the coffee shop on Harbor Street tomorrow morning, 7:30. And Noah," he looked directly at me, "don't trust anyone at this place. Not if you really want to help your grandmother." The coffee shop on Harbor Street was the kind of place where fishermen grabbed caffeine before dawn runs, and retirees lingered over newspapers until noon. At 7:30 in the morning, it was caught between those worlds, mostly empty except for a handful of early risers and the persistent smell of bacon from the kitchen. Raphael was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall and a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. "You came," he said as I slid into the booth across from him.
"You said I shouldn't trust anyone at Sunset Manor. That's a hell of a thing to say about your own workplace." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what I did before this job? I worked at a nursing home in Boston. A good one. Clean, well-staffed, legitimate. I thought all nursing homes were like that." He took a sip of his coffee and grimaced. "Sunset Manor is different." "Different how?" "Corners cut everywhere, understaffed on purpose, and things disappear. Not just from your grandmother, from a lot of residents." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There's a pattern. Valuables go missing or get put in the office safe for security. Credit cards get handed over for simplified billing. Family members are told not to worry about finances because it might confuse the resident." I thought about the nurse who told Grandma not to worry about those strange charges. How deep does this go? Deep enough. Raphael pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. "I took this yesterday in Kendra's office while she was at lunch. Recognize anything?" The image showed a desk drawer partially open, revealing several pieces of jewelry. My heart stopped when I spotted a familiar strand of pearls with a silver clasp. "Is that your grandmother's necklace?" "Along with a few other pieces that belong to residents who are supposedly keeping them safely locked away." I stared at the photo, feeling anger build in my chest like a pressure cooker. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because someone needs to know. And because..." He hesitated. "My aunt died in a place like this. I was too young then to understand what was happening, but looking back, I can see the signs. I don't want that to happen to Mrs. Morgan." "What do you need from me?" "Documentation. Evidence. I can't do this alone. If Kendra finds out I'm talking, I'm fired. But your family, you have rights she can't take away." I pulled out my phone and took a photo of his photo. "What else do you know?" "The credit card thing is systematic. They convince residents to hand over their cards for billing purposes, then use them for purchases that get resold or returned for cash. The jewelry and valuables get sold to pawn shops or online dealers. It's all very carefully managed to avoid suspicion. By Kendra? She's the one with access, but I don't think she's working alone. Some of this requires inside knowledge of the residents' financial situations, family dynamics. Someone's feeding her information. I thought about Victoria's dismissive attitude, her insistence that she was handling Grandma's finances, her decision to move Grandma without warning. What if the information source is family? Raphael's expression grew somber. That's occurred to me too. After Raphael left for work, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, staring at the photo on my phone and trying to process what I'd learned. Then I called Max. I need you to run a deeper trace on those credit card purchases. Find something interesting? More than interesting. Can you meet me at your shop? Max's computer repair business occupied a narrow storefront wedged between a used bookstore and a shop that sold nautical antiques to tourists. The inside looked like an electronics graveyard. Towers of old computers, tangles of cables, and enough blinking lights to stock a small Christmas display. Show me what you got, Max said, settling behind her workstation. I told her about Raphael's revelations and showed her the photo of Grandma's jewelry. Max's expression grew darker as I talked. Okay, now I'm pissed. Let me dig deeper into these transactions. For the next 2 hours, Max worked her digital magic while I paced behind her, watching codes scroll across multiple monitors. She traced shipping addresses, cross-referenced purchase dates with resale listings, and followed digital breadcrumbs through a maze of online marketplaces.
Holy shit, she said finally. Noah, look at this. She had multiple browser windows open, showing various transactions and their destinations. That tablet your grandmother supposedly bought? It was resold on eBay 3 days later by a seller called Portland Deals 207. The designer handbag went through a consignment shop in Portland. And the jewelry store transaction? They have an online catalog, and I found the piece that was sold. A pearl necklace matching the description of your grandmother's. They sold her own necklace and put the money back on her credit card? Exactly. It's money laundering, basically. Steal the item, sell it, use the victim's credit card to hide the cash transaction. Very clever and hard to trace unless you know what to look for. I stared at the screens, feeling sick. How many other residents are they doing this to? Want me to find out? Can you? Max grinned, but it wasn't a happy expression. Give me a few more hours and access to the internet. I'll find out everything. While Max worked, I drove back to Sunset Manor, this time bringing my camera and a story about documenting Grandma's adjustment for a family album. It was a thin excuse, but it gave me a reason to take pictures of everything: the building layout, staff members, even the office area where Kendra worked. Grandma was having lunch in the common dining room when I arrived, picking at a sandwich that looked like it had been made that morning and left out to contemplate its existence. She smiled when she saw me, but I noticed she'd lost more weight. You're becoming a regular visitor. Not that I'm complaining. Just making sure you're settling in okay. I sat beside her and casually raised my camera. Mind if I take a few pictures for the family album? Oh, honey, I look terrible. You look beautiful. And she did, despite everything. Age and institutional food couldn't dim the kindness in her eyes or the strength in her smile. As I took photos, I noticed things that hadn't registered before. The security camera positioned to watch the dining area, but not the administrative offices. The way staff moved through residents' belongings with casual familiarity. The fact that several residents wore no jewelry at all, not even wedding rings. An elderly man at the next table was trying to eat soup with shaking hands, spilling more than he consumed. A young aide, not Raphael, watched him struggle without offering help. "Where's Raphael today?" I asked Grandma. "He has Thursdays off, I think. Different aide today." She lowered her voice. "Not as nice." After lunch, I walked Grandma back to her room and helped her settle in her chair by the window. She moved more slowly than she had just days ago.
and I wondered if it was the medication, the institutional food, or something deeper. The gradual erosion of hope that comes with having your choices taken away. "Grandma," I said carefully, "how do you feel about being here? Really?" She was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the harbor. "I understand why Victoria thought it was necessary. I do. But," she sighed, "I never got to say goodbye to my garden, or my neighbors, or even my mailman, silly as that sounds. One day I was home, and the next day I was here, and everything familiar was just gone. Would you want to go back home if you could?" "Home's gone, honey. Victoria sold it last week. She said the money would help pay for this place." Another shock. Another decision made without consultation. I felt the familiar anger building, but I kept my voice gentle. "She didn't ask you about selling?" "She said it was too much responsibility for someone my age." She reached for my hand. "Don't be angry with her, Noah. She's doing what she thinks is best." But as I drove home through the foggy streets of Port Arthur, I couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria's definition of best had very little to do with what was good for Grandma Ellie.
Max called me at 6 the next morning, her voice tight with excitement and anger. "You need to get over here. Now, I've found something." I threw on clothes and drove through the empty streets to her shop, where I found her surrounded by empty coffee cups and printouts scattered across every available surface. She looked like she'd been up all night. "Tell me you got some sleep," I said. "Sleep is for people who aren't tracking down thieves." She gestured to her monitors. "Sit down and prepare to be amazed and horrified." The screens showed a complex web of transactions, shipping addresses, and online seller accounts that Max had connected through hours of digital detective work. "Your grandmother isn't the only victim," she said. "I found similar patterns for at least 6 other residents at Sunset Manor. Jewelry sold through consignment shops, electronics purchased and immediately resold, credit cards used for cash advances that get funneled through various business accounts." Jesus, how much money are we talking about? "Conservatively, about $15,000 over the past 6 months, per resident. We're looking at organized fraud on a significant scale." I stared at the numbers, feeling overwhelmed. "And you can prove all this?" "I can prove the transactions and trace them to specific accounts and locations. What I can't prove is who's doing it beyond reasonable doubt." She pulled up a map on her screen. "But I can tell you where a lot of the stolen items end up." The map showed Port Arthur and the surrounding area with several locations marked in red. Most were in Portland, but 3 were local, including one that made my stomach drop. "Murphy's Pawn and Trade," I read. "That's 2 blocks from my apartment." Exactly, and according to their online inventory, they've received a steady stream of estate jewelry and electronics over the past few months. The timing matches perfectly with the residents' missing items. I studied the map, noting the other locations. Are these all connected? Not officially, but they all seem to be part of a network. Items go missing from Sunset Manor, get sold at these locations, and the money either gets laundered back through credit card transactions or disappears entirely. We need to see that pawn shop. I was hoping you'd say that. Murphy's Pawn and Trade occupied a narrow building wedged between a laundromat and a store that sold fishing supplies. The windows were covered with metal grating and hand-lettered signs advertising "Cash for Gold" and "We Buy Electronics." A bell jangled as we pushed through the door. The interior smelled like old cigarettes and disappointment. Glass cases lined the walls, filled with an eclectic mix of jewelry, watches, cameras, and musical instruments. The owner, a thin man with graying hair and suspicious eyes, looked up from a magazine. "Help you folks?" "I'm looking for jewelry, something vintage and special, you know." "What kind of thing you got in mind? Pearls, maybe? or something with sentimental value. My grandmother always said estate jewelry had the best stories. The owner's expression shifted slightly. Estate jewelry? Sure. Got some nice pieces that came in recently. He moved to a case near the back of the store. How about this? My breath caught. He was holding a silver bracelet I recognized immediately, one Grandma had worn to every family gathering for as long as I could remember, the one with tiny charms that represented places she'd traveled with my grandfather. That's beautiful, Max said, stepping closer. How much? $200. Real silver, probably from the 40s or 50s. Got it from a estate situation. Recent estate? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Past few weeks. Nice old lady, apparently. Family's liquidating. He set the bracelet on the counter. Got a few other pieces from the same estate if you're interested.
He produced a tray from beneath the counter. My grandmother's wedding ring. A brooch that had belonged to her mother. A pair of earrings I'd seen her wear to church every Sunday. I felt Max tense beside me, recognizing the significance even though she'd never met Grandma. "The family sold all this?" she asked. "Well, not directly. We work with a intermediary, someone who handles estate sales for families who don't want the hassle." He leaned forward conspiratorially. "Between you and me, sometimes these situations get complicated. Nursing home expenses, medical bills, families need quick cash." "This intermediary have a name?" The owner's friendly demeanor cooled slightly. "We keep our business relationships confidential. Client privacy, you understand." I pulled out my phone and pretended to check a text message while actually activating the camera. "I need to think about it. This is a big purchase." Sure, but don't think too long. Estate pieces like this move fast." As we left the shop, I felt like I might be sick. Seeing Grandma's treasures laid out for sale like merchandise, being told they came from an estate situation, as if she were already dead, it was almost more than I could process. "We need to call the police," Max said as soon as we were outside. "With what proof? Everything we saw could have been sold legitimately by family members. But it wasn't. We know that. But can we prove it in court?" I thought about Detective Carter, about his reluctance to get involved in family business. We need more evidence. Max grabbed my arm. "Noah, we can't just let this continue. Every day they're stealing more from her, from all of them." "I know, but if we move too fast, they'll cover their tracks and we'll never be able to prove anything." I looked back at the pawn shop, where Grandma's life was being sold piece by piece. What's our next move? I thought about Raphael's warning, about the systematic nature of the theft, about Victoria's convenient involvement in all of Grandma's financial decisions. We need to find out who the intermediary is, and we need to figure out how deep this goes. As we walked back to Max's shop, I couldn't shake the image of that charm bracelet sitting in the display case. Each charm represented a trip Grandma and Grandpa had taken together. Cape Cod, Niagara Falls, the White Mountains. Now they were just merchandise, their stories forgotten, their meaning reduced to whatever quick cash they could generate. But seeing those treasures had also crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about money or fraud. It was about stealing the last remnants of a person's history, taking away the physical anchors to a lifetime of memories. And I wasn't going to let that happen to Grandma Ellie. Victoria's real estate office occupied a prime corner location on Main Street, with large windows displaying glossy photos of waterfront properties that most locals could never afford. Through the glass, I could see her at her desk, perfectly coiffed and professional,
talking on the phone with the kind of animated gestures that suggested a big sale in progress. I had been putting off this conversation for 3 days, but after seeing Grandma's jewelry in that pawn shop, I couldn't wait any longer. The bell chimed as I entered, and Victoria looked up with surprise that quickly shifted to polished professionalism. "Noah, what a nice surprise. I was just thinking I should call you. How's Grandma settling in?" "That's what I wanted to talk to you about." I gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Can we talk privately?" "Of course." She closed her office door and returned to her seat, hands folded, expression attentive. "Is there a problem?" "She's been getting credit card statements with charges she doesn't remember making." Victoria's smile never wavered. "Oh, that. I've been handling some purchases for her comfort at the facility. Special foods, personal care items, things to make her room more pleasant. I probably should have mentioned it when you visited."
$90 at an electronics store? $230 for online purchases? A tablet to help her stay connected with family, and some nice bedding. The facility's linens are so institutional. Victoria leaned back in her chair. "I know it seems expensive, but quality items last longer." I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo Max had taken of the pawn shop inventory. "Then why are her personal belongings being sold at Murphy's Pawn and Trade?" The professional mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of something that might have been anger or fear. Then it was back in place, but with a harder hedge. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Her charm bracelet, her wedding ring, her mother's brooch. They're all sitting in a display case 2 blocks from here. Victoria stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the street with her back to me. "Noah, I understand this transition has been difficult for you. You've always been attached to your grandmother, but sometimes adult decisions have to be made for people who can no longer make them for themselves. She's not incompetent. Her mind is perfectly clear." "Is it, though? When I found her last month, she'd left the stove on all night. She'd forgotten to pay her electric bill for 3 months. The house was, well, it wasn't safe for her anymore." "So you moved her to a nursing home and started selling her belongings without telling her?" "I'm managing her affairs, yes. As her next of kin and healthcare proxy, that's my responsibility. The jewelry you saw could have been sold by anyone. Maybe she gave some pieces away years ago and forgot. Maybe they're not even hers." "I know her jewelry, Victoria. I've seen her wear those pieces my entire life." "Memory can be tricky, Noah, especially when you're looking for something to be upset about." The dismissiveness in her voice, the way she was turning my concerns into character flaws, made my anger spike. "Why didn't you tell me you were moving her? Why didn't you ask what she wanted?" "Because I knew you'd react exactly like this. You'd get emotional and make everything more difficult than it needed to be." "Emotional about my grandmother being robbed?" "Dramatic about necessary decisions being made by the appropriate person." She picked up a pen and pulled a contract toward her. "I'm sorry you're upset, but this conversation is over." I stayed in my chair. "What did you do with the money from selling her house?" Victoria's pen stopped moving. "That's none of your business." "It is if you're using it for something other than her care." "The money is being used exactly as it should be, for her medical expenses and facility costs." But her voice lacked conviction, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. "I want to see the records." "You have no legal right to see anything." Victoria stood up again, and this time there was no mistaking the threat in her posture. "I suggest you think very carefully before you make accusations you can't prove, Noah. Slander is a serious matter." "Is that a threat?" "It's friendly advice from one family member to another." She moved to the door and opened it. "I have clients to see." I walked out of her office feeling like I'd just been told to sit down and shut up by someone who thought she held all the cards. But Victoria had revealed more than she intended. Her defensiveness, her refusal to show documentation, her immediate jump to legal threats,
None of that was the behavior of someone with nothing to hide. Outside on the sidewalk, I called Raphael. "Can you meet me tonight, after your shift?" "What's wrong?" "I just had a very interesting conversation with my mother. I think it's time we involved the police." Detective Miles Carter's office in the Port Arthur Police Department looked like it hadn't been updated since the Carter administration, the Jimmy Carter administration. Yellowed Venetian blinds filtered the afternoon light, and the desk was buried under stacks of files that suggested crime in our small town was more common than the tourism board liked to admit. Carter himself looked like he'd been part of the decor for about as long. A tall, thin man in his 50s, with graying hair and the weary expression of someone who'd seen enough human nature to lose most of his illusions about it. He'd known my family since I was a kid, which made this conversation both easier and harder. "Noah Morgan," he said as I knocked on his open door. "Heard you were back in town. Photography business treating you well?" "Can't complain." I settled into the chair across from his desk. "Thanks for seeing me on short notice. Your message said it was about your grandmother. She okay?" I pulled out the folder I'd prepared, printouts of credit card statements, photos from the pawn shop, Max's analysis of the financial transactions. "That's what I'm trying to find out." Carter listened as I laid out everything we'd discovered. The suspicious charges, the missing jewelry, the systematic pattern of exploitation at Sunset Manor. He took notes occasionally, but mostly just watched me with the patience of someone who'd heard a lot of stories over the years. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied the document spread across his desk. "This is quite a collection," he said finally. "You've obviously put a lot of work into this. So you'll investigate?" Carter sighed. "Noah, I've known your family for 20 years. Your mother isn't some criminal mastermind. She's a businesswoman trying to take care of her elderly mother in a difficult situation. By stealing from her? By making hard decisions that you might not agree with." He tapped the credit card statements. "These charges could all be legitimate purchases that your grandmother simply doesn't remember. Memory issues are common at her age." "Her memory is fine." "Is it? Have you spent extended time with her recently? Sometimes family members are the last to notice cognitive decline." I felt like I was arguing with Victoria all over again. "What about the jewelry in the pawn shop? Could have been sold by your mother with your grandmother's consent or years ago, and you're just noticing now. Estate jewelry circulates. That's how pawn shops work." Carter picked up one of the photos I'd taken at Sunset Manor. "And this place, whatever its problems, is a licensed facility. If there were systematic fraud happening, don't you think other families would have noticed?" "Maybe they have. Maybe they were dismissed the same way you're dismissing me." That got a reaction. Carter's expression hardened slightly. "I'm not dismissing you, Noah. I'm trying to explain why this isn't as clear-cut as you think it is." "So you won't investigate?" "I didn't say that." He gathered the documents into a neat pile. "But family disputes are messy, and elder care situations are complicated. Even if everything you suspect is true, proving criminal intent would be extremely difficult." "What would it take to convince you?" Carter thought for a moment. "Direct evidence. A witness who could testify that they saw fraud being committed. Documentation that couldn't be explained as legitimate family financial management." "What about testimony from nursing home staff? Staff members who might have their own agenda, who might be disgruntled employees or people looking to cause trouble for their employer?" Carter shook his head. "That's not the kind of witness who wins cases." I felt the familiar frustration building. "So essentially, unless I catch someone red-handed stealing from my grandmother, nothing can be done?" "I'm saying that allegations of financial abuse within families are some of the hardest cases to prosecute. The law gives family members broad authority to manage elderly relatives' affairs, and proving that authority is being abused requires clear evidence of criminal intent." Carter leaned forward, his expression softening slightly. "Look, I understand you're worried about your grandmother. That's admirable. But sometimes the best thing you can do is work within the family to address your concerns, rather than turning it into a criminal matter.
Work within the family. I stood up and gathered my documents. Right. Thanks for your time, Detective. Noah. He stopped me at the door. If you do find something concrete, something that can't be explained away as family decision-making, bring it to me. I'll look at it. Outside the police station, I sat in my truck and tried to process what had just happened. Carter wasn't corrupt or indifferent. He was just cautious, maybe overly so. He needed evidence that would stand up in court, not just the suspicions of a concerned grandson. Which meant I needed to get that evidence. I called Raphael. Are you working tonight? Yeah, evening shift. Why? I need you to document everything you can. Take pictures if possible. The more evidence we have, the harder it will be for people to ignore. Noah, I told you, if they catch me, I know. But Detective Carter basically said that without an inside witness, this goes nowhere. You're the only person in that place who gives a damn about what's happening to these residents. There was a long pause. My aunt, Raphael said finally. She died in a place like this because I was too scared to speak up. I've regretted that every day for 8 years. You don't have to decide now. Just think about it. After he hung up, I drove down to the harbor and parked where I could see Sunset Manor on the hill above town. The building looked peaceful in the late afternoon light, like the kind of place where people went to live out their golden years in comfort and dignity. But I knew better now. I knew that behind those calm windows, elderly people were being slowly robbed of their belongings, their autonomy, their dignity. And the system that was supposed to protect them was either complicit or too bureaucratic to care. I thought about Grandma Ellie, probably sitting by her window right now, watching the harbor and wondering what had happened to the necklace her mother had given her, wondering why her grandson didn't visit more often, not knowing that every visit broke his heart a little more. Detective Carter wanted concrete evidence. Raphael was afraid of losing his job. Victoria was hiding behind legal authority and family dynamics. But somewhere in that building, someone was stealing from vulnerable people, and I was going to find a way to stop them, even if I had to do it alone. The call came at 2 a.m, Raphael's voice tight with urgency. Can you meet me? Now? What's wrong? I can't talk over the phone. The diner on Route 1, the one that's open all night. I threw on clothes and drove through the empty streets to the 24-hour diner that served truckers and insomniacs. Raphael was in a back booth, looking exhausted and shaken. A cup of coffee sat untouched in front of him. You look like hell, I said, sliding into the booth. I had to call in sick tomorrow. I can't go back there, not yet. He pulled out his phone and set it on the table between us. I got what you needed. What happened? Kendra called a staff meeting tonight, late shift only after the day administrators went home. She said there had been inventory discrepancies and wanted to make sure everyone understood the policies regarding residents' personal belongings. But what she was really doing was coaching us on what to say if anyone asked questions, how to explain missing items, how to redirect family concerns, how to document things to cover the facility's ass. He showed me the screen. My heart started racing. She actually admitted to covering up theft? Better than that. She gave specific instructions on how to handle liquidations and how to process estate disposals for residents who were still alive. Raphael's voice was grim. Listen to this. He hit play, and Kendra's voice filled the small space between us, clear and unmistakable. Remember, when families ask about missing items, the story is always safety and security. Items are being kept in the office safe, or the family requested removal, or the resident decided they didn't need them anymore. Never admit that anything is actually missing. A pause. Then,
The billing procedures we discussed last month are working well. Credit card authorizations should always be filed as miscellaneous care expenses or comfort purchases. The families rarely question small amounts, and by the time they notice patterns, the money has already been processed through our usual channels. Another voice on the recording, a female aide I didn't recognize. What if someone demands to see receipts? Kendra's response was chilling in its casualness. Receipts can be generated for almost anything. Remember, these people are old and confused. Their families are busy and stressed. No one wants to spend time fighting over $60 charges when they're dealing with end-of-life care. I stared at Raphael across the table. This is it. This is what Carter needed. There's more. Raphael scrolled through his phone. After the meeting, I went to Kendra's office. I knew she keeps backup documents in a filing cabinet behind her desk. He showed me photos of bank statements, shipping receipts, and a ledger that tracked liquidated assets by resident name. Grandma Ellie's name appeared multiple times with items listed beside dollar amounts. Pearl necklace, $150. Charm bracelet, $80. Wedding ring, $200. She's been systematically cataloging everything she steals, I said, incredulous. It gets worse. Look at this. He swiped to another photo, showing a contract between Sunset Manor and something called Estate Solutions, LLC. The agreement outlined a revenue-sharing arrangement for unclaimed resident property and simplified estate liquidations. Estate Solutions, LLC, I repeated. Let me guess, that's the intermediary the pawnshop owner mentioned? Has to be. And look who signed as the primary contact for arranging family estate services. Raphael pointed to his signature at the bottom of the contract. Victoria Morgan. I sat back in the booth, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. Seeing it in black and white, my mother's signature on a contract designed to steal from elderly residents made it impossible to maintain any illusions about family loyalty or misunderstandings. Noah, are you okay? Raphael's voice seemed to come from far away. My mother isn't just complicit, she's running the whole thing. I'm sorry. I looked at the photos again, at the careful documentation of stolen belongings, at the systematic exploitation of vulnerable people. How many residents are they doing this to? Based on what I saw tonight, all of them. Anyone who doesn't have family actively monitoring their care becomes a target, and even some who do. Raphael's expression was grim. Mrs. Chen in room 204 lost her husband's watch last week. Mr. Peterson's family keeps asking about his coin collection. They're all getting the same runaround. We need to get this to Detective Carter. I know, but Noah, once I turn this over, I'm done. They'll figure out I was the source, and I'll never work in healthcare again. Would you rather keep quiet and let this continue? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his coffee. My aunt used to tell me stories about her childhood in El Salvador, about how ordinary people had to choose between staying safe and doing what was right. She said the people who chose safety always regretted it later. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Raphael met my eyes. These people deserve better. They worked their whole lives, raised families, contributed to their communities. They don't deserve to have their final years stolen from them by people they're supposed to trust?
I reached across the table and shook his hand. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when these bastards are in jail. As we left the diner, Raphael transferred all the photos and audio files to my phone. The evidence was damning. Clear proof of systematic fraud, theft, and exploitation. Even Detective Carter would have to take action now. But as I drove home through the pre-dawn darkness, I couldn't stop thinking about Victoria's signature on that contract. Whatever happened next, it would destroy what was left of our family. Grandma Ellie would lose her daughter along with her possessions. Still, as I pulled into the parking lot behind Murphy's Bait and Tackle, I knew there was no choice. Some things were more important than family harmony. Some fights were worth having,
even when they cost you everything, especially then. Detective Carter called me at 8 in the morning, 3 hours after I'd emailed Raphael's evidence. I need you and your witness at the station, now. You believe us? What I believe doesn't matter anymore. What you've given me is enough for a warrant. His voice was all business. How soon can you get here? Raphael was waiting in the police station lobby when I arrived, looking nervous but determined. We were escorted to a small conference room where Carter was setting up recording equipment. Before we start, Carter said, I want you both to understand what's going to happen. Based on the evidence you've provided, we're executing search warrants this morning at Sunset Manor and your mother's real estate office. This is going to become very public very quickly. I thought about Victoria, probably preparing for another day of showing houses and making deals, having no idea that her world was about to collapse. What about the residents? Will they be okay during all this? We're coordinating with the state health department. The facility will remain operational, but under supervision. Carter sat across from us. Now, I need Raphael to walk me through everything he recorded and documented. For the next 2 hours, Raphael gave his statement, while I provided context about the credit card fraud and the pawn shop connections. Carter asked detailed questions, building a timeline that stretched back months and potentially affected dozens of residents. The district attorney will want to interview you both again, but this should be enough to get started. As we left the station, I could see police cars heading toward the hill where Sunset Manor sat overlooking the harbor. By afternoon, the story would be everywhere. I drove to my apartment and did something I hadn't done in months. I opened my laptop and started writing, not grant applications or client emails, but a real story. The story of what I'd discovered, how I'd discovered it, and why it mattered. I wrote about Grandma Ellie sitting by her window watching the harbor and wondering what had happened to her mother's necklace. About Raphael risking his job to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. About the systematic way that vulnerable elderly residents were being stripped of their dignity along with their possessions. I wrote about the charm bracelet in the pawn shop, each charm representing a memory that was now for sale to the highest bidder. About the way institutions designed to provide care had become machines for exploitation. And yes, I wrote about Victoria. About the painful discovery that my own mother had orchestrated the theft from her own mother. About the contract with her signature that turned elderly residents into revenue streams. When I finished, I had 2,000 words that told the complete story, backed up with photographic evidence and documented proof. I attached Raphael's audio recording and Max's financial analysis. Then I posted it everywhere. Facebook first, then the Port Arthur Community Forum, then every local news outlet I could find online. I sent it to the Portland Press Herald and the Bangor Daily News. I uploaded it to Medium and shared it on Twitter with hashtags like elder abuse and justice for Ellie.
My phone started ringing within an hour. Noah Morgan, this is Sarah Chan from Channel 8 News. We'd like to interview you about your story regarding Sunset Manor. Mr. Morgan, this is the Portland Press Herald. Can you verify the authenticity of the audio recording you posted? Noah, it's Tom Brady from the Bangor Daily News. We're running a story about the nursing home investigation, and we'd like to include your perspective. By evening, the story had exploded across social media. Justice for Ellie was trending locally, and people were sharing their own stories about elderly relatives who had mysteriously lost belongings in nursing homes. The comments section filled with outrage, support, and similar experiences from across Maine. Max called around 6. Holy shit, Noah, you broke the internet. Good or bad? Definitely good. People are pissed, but they're pissed at the right people. I've seen the story shared 500 times just in the past hour. An hour later, Raphael called. They arrested Kendra this afternoon, charged her with theft, fraud, and exploitation of elderly persons. The DA says more charges are coming. What about Victoria? I don't know yet, but the police spent 4 hours going through her office. I was making dinner when Detective Carter called. Your mother wants to see you, he said without preamble. Where is she? County jail. She was arrested this afternoon on fraud charges. She's asking for you specifically. I stared out my window at the harbor, where fishing boats were coming in with the day's catch. Normal life continuing while my family fell apart. Will you see her? Carter asked. I don't know. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Took guts to go up against your own family. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, watching the sun set over Port Arthur. Somewhere up on the hill, Grandma Ellie was probably having dinner in the Sunset Manor cafeteria, unaware that the people who had been stealing from her were now in custody. Tomorrow, I would visit her and try to explain what had happened. I would tell her about the investigation, about the arrests, about the fact that some of her stolen belongings might eventually be recovered. But tonight, I just sat in the gathering darkness and tried to process what it meant to choose justice over family, truth over loyalty, doing what was right over doing what was easy. It felt like the loneliest victory in the world. 3 months later, I stood in the garden behind the small house Grandma Ellie was renting on Elm Street, watching her tend to the rose bushes she'd rescued from her old home before Victoria sold it. She moved slowly but purposefully, her hands sure despite their tremor, coaxing life from plants that had survived neglect and transplantation. "The pink ones will bloom soon," she said, not looking up from her work. "They were always my favorites." I adjusted my camera settings and took a series of shots. Grandma Ellie among her roses, sunlight filtering through the leaves, the small house that had become her refuge after everything fell apart. These photos weren't for a client or a newspaper. They were for me, for her, for the story that was still being written. The legal proceedings had moved faster than I had expected. Kendra Lawson pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and theft, accepting a 5-year sentence in exchange for cooperation with prosecutors. The state health department had taken over Sunset Manor's operations, and several other staff members faced criminal charges. Victoria's case was more complicated. The evidence against her was clear. The contracts, the systematic arrangement with pawn shops, the coordination of what amounted to organized theft from elderly residents. But her lawyer had negotiated a plea deal: restitution to all victims, community service, and 5 years of probation in exchange for avoiding jail time. She'd repaid nearly $50,000 to affected families and signed over her share of proceeds from Grandma's house sale to cover additional damages. The money had been enough for Grandma to rent this house and hire a part-time aide, allowing her to live independently again.
"Have you talked to her?" Grandma asked, settling onto a garden bench with a satisfied sigh. She meant Victoria. We all avoided saying her name directly, as if speaking it might summon complications none of us were ready to handle. "No," I said, lowering my camera. "Have you?" "She called last week, wanted to explain herself." Grandma's expression was thoughtful rather than angry. "I told her I wasn't ready for explanations yet." "Are you angry with her?" "I'm disappointed. Heartbroken, maybe, but anger," she shrugged. "Anger takes too much energy, and I don't have energy to waste." I sat beside her on the bench, noting how much better she looked. The institutional pallor was gone, replaced with the healthy glow of someone who spent time outdoors. She'd gained back the weight she'd lost at Sunset Manor, and her eyes had regained their familiar sparkle. "Are you angry with her?" she asked. "Sometimes. Mostly I just don't understand how she could do it." "People do terrible things when they're afraid," Grandma said. "Your mother was always afraid of not having enough money, of not looking successful, of other people judging her choices. Fear makes us do things we never thought we were capable of." "Does that excuse it?" "No, but it explains it." She reached over and patted my hand. "You did the right thing, Noah. It couldn't have been easy." It hadn't been easy. For weeks after the story broke, I had been flooded with interview requests, job offers from newspapers in bigger cities, and messages from families dealing with similar situations. The photography work that had once barely paid my bills was now supplemented by freelance investigative pieces for regional publications. Raphael stopped by yesterday. He wanted to check on me. Raphael had found a new job at a rehabilitation center in Portland. Better pay, better working conditions, and management that seemed to actually care about patient welfare. He'd testified in both Kendra's and Victoria's cases, his recorded evidence becoming the cornerstone of the prosecution. "He's a good man," I said. "He thinks highly of you, too. Says you gave him the courage to do what was right." I thought about the night at the diner when Raphael had decided to risk everything to protect people he barely knew. I think he had that courage all along. He just needed to know he wasn't alone. That's usually all any of us need. A car pulled into the driveway, and Max emerged carrying a grocery bag and wearing the kind of grin that usually meant trouble. "Hope you're hungry," she called out. "I brought lobster rolls from Murphy's and that potato salad your grandmother likes." "You spoil me," Grandma said, but she was smiling. Max had become a regular visitor, partly because she genuinely enjoyed Grandma's company, but mostly because she was working on a book about elder fraud and wanted to document the aftermath of our investigation. Publishers were interested, and Max was convinced it could help other families recognize and prevent similar situations. "Any word from that magazine in Boston?" Max asked as she unpacked the food. I nodded. "They want me to investigate a story about home healthcare fraud in rural communities. Similar pattern to what we found here, but spread across multiple counties." "You going to take it?" I looked at Grandma, who was deadheading roses with the focused attention of someone who found genuine peace in the simple task. "I think so. Turns out I'm good at this kind of work." "You always were good at seeing what other people missed. That's what made you a good photographer. Same skill, different subject." As the afternoon wore on, we ate lunch in the garden and talked about small things, the progress of the roses, Max's latest computer projects, my plans for the magazine story. Normal conversation that felt precious after months of lawyers and courtrooms and difficult decisions. Detective Carter stopped by around 4, still in uniform, but carrying a small wrapped package. "Have you talked to her?" Grandma asked, settling onto a garden bench with a satisfied sigh. She meant Victoria. We all avoided saying her name directly, as if speaking it might summon complications none of us were ready to handle. "No," I said, lowering my camera. "Have you?" "She called last week, wanted to explain herself." Grandma's expression was thoughtful rather than angry. "I told her I wasn't ready for explanations yet." "Are you angry with her?" "I'm disappointed. Heartbroken, maybe, but anger," she shrugged. "Anger takes too much energy, and I don't have energy to waste." I sat beside her on the bench, noting how much better she looked. The institutional pallor was gone, replaced with the healthy glow of someone who spent time outdoors. She'd gained back the weight she'd lost at Sunset Manor, and her eyes had regained their familiar sparkle. "Are you angry with her?" she asked. "Sometimes. Mostly I just don't understand how she could do it." "People do terrible things when they're afraid," Grandma said. "Your mother was always afraid of not having enough money, of not looking successful, of other people judging her choices. Fear makes us do things we never thought we were capable of." "Does that excuse it?" "No, but it explains it." She reached over and patted my hand. "You did the right thing, Noah. It couldn't have been easy." It hadn't been easy. For weeks after the story broke, I had been flooded with interview requests, job offers from newspapers in bigger cities, and messages from families dealing with similar situations. The photography work that had once barely paid my bills was now supplemented by freelance investigative pieces for regional publications. Raphael stopped by yesterday. He wanted to check on me. Raphael had found a new job at a rehabilitation center in Portland. Better pay, better working conditions, and management that seemed to actually care about patient welfare. He'd testified in both Kendra's and Victoria's cases, his recorded evidence becoming the cornerstone of the prosecution. "He's a good man," I said. "He thinks highly of you, too. Says you gave him the courage to do what was right." I thought about the night at the diner when Raphael had decided to risk everything to protect people he barely knew. I think he had that courage all along. He just needed to know he wasn't alone. That's usually all any of us need. A car pulled into the driveway, and Max emerged carrying a grocery bag and wearing the kind of grin that usually meant trouble. "Hope you're hungry," she called out. "I brought lobster rolls from Murphy's and that potato salad your grandmother likes." "You spoil me," Grandma said, but she was smiling. Max had become a regular visitor, partly because she genuinely enjoyed Grandma's company, but mostly because she was working on a book about elder fraud and wanted to document the aftermath of our investigation. Publishers were interested, and Max was convinced it could help other families recognize and prevent similar situations. "Any word from that magazine in Boston?" Max asked as she unpacked the food. I nodded. "They want me to investigate a story about home healthcare fraud in rural communities. Similar pattern to what we found here, but spread across multiple counties." "You going to take it?" I looked at Grandma, who was deadheading roses with the focused attention of someone who found genuine peace in the simple task. "I think so. Turns out I'm good at this kind of work." "You always were good at seeing what other people missed. That's what made you a good photographer. Same skill, different subject." As the afternoon wore on, we ate lunch in the garden and talked about small things: the progress of the roses, Max's latest computer projects, my plans for the magazine story. Normal conversation that felt precious after months of lawyers and courtrooms and difficult decisions. Detective Carter stopped by around 4, still in uniform, but carrying a small wrapped package. "Have you talked to her?" Grandma asked, settling onto a garden bench with a satisfied sigh. She meant Victoria. We all avoided saying her name directly, as if speaking it might summon complications none of us were ready to handle. "No," I said, lowering my camera. "Have you?" "She called last week, wanted to explain herself." Grandma's expression was thoughtful rather than angry. "I told her I wasn't ready for explanations yet." "Are you angry with her?" "I'm disappointed. Heartbroken, maybe, but anger," she shrugged. "Anger takes too much energy, and I don't have energy to waste." I sat beside her on the bench, noting how much better she looked. The institutional pallor was gone, replaced with the healthy glow of someone who spent time outdoors. She'd gained back the weight she'd lost at Sunset Manor, and her eyes had regained their familiar sparkle. "Are you angry with her?" she asked. "Sometimes. Mostly I just don't understand how she could do it." "People do terrible things when they're afraid," Grandma said. "Your mother was always afraid of not having enough money, of not looking successful, of other people judging her choices. Fear makes us do things we never thought we were capable of." "Does that excuse it?" "No, but it explains it." She reached over and patted my hand. "You did the right thing, Noah. It couldn't have been easy." It hadn't been easy. For weeks after the story broke, I had been flooded with interview requests, job offers from newspapers in bigger cities, and messages from families dealing with similar situations. The photography work that had once barely paid my bills was now supplemented by freelance investigative pieces for regional publications. Raphael stopped by yesterday. He wanted to check on me. Raphael had found a new job at a rehabilitation center in Portland. Better pay, better working conditions, and management that seemed to actually care about patient welfare. He'd testified in both Kendra's and Victoria's cases, his recorded evidence becoming the cornerstone of the prosecution. "He's a good man," I said. "He thinks highly of you, too. Says you gave him the courage to do what was right." I thought about the night at the diner when Raphael had decided to risk everything to protect people he barely knew. I think he had that courage all along. He just needed to know he wasn't alone. That's usually all any of us need. A car pulled into the driveway, and Max emerged carrying a grocery bag and wearing the kind of grin that usually meant trouble. "Hope you're hungry," she called out. "I brought lobster rolls from Murphy's and that potato salad your grandmother likes." "You spoil me," Grandma said, but she was smiling. Max had become a regular visitor, partly because she genuinely enjoyed Grandma's company, but mostly because she was working on a book about elder fraud and wanted to document the aftermath of our investigation. Publishers were interested, and Max was convinced it could help other families recognize and prevent similar situations. "Any word from that magazine in Boston?" Max asked as she unpacked the food. I nodded. They want me to investigate a story about home healthcare fraud in rural communities. Similar pattern to what we found here, but spread across multiple counties. You going to take it? I looked at Grandma, who was deadheading roses with the focused attention of someone who found genuine peace in the simple task. I think so. Turns out I'm good at this kind of work. You always were good at seeing what other people missed. That's what made you a good photographer. Same skill, different subject. As the afternoon wore on, we ate lunch in the garden and talked about small things, the progress of the roses, Max's latest computer projects, my plans for the magazine story. Normal conversation that felt precious after months of lawyers and courtrooms and difficult decisions. Detective Carter stopped by around 4, still in uniform, but carrying a small wrapped package.
"Mrs. Morgan," he said, approaching the garden bench with formal politeness, "I have something that belongs to you." He handed her the package, and she unwrapped it to reveal her mother's pearl necklace, the one I'd seen in the pawn shop what felt like a lifetime ago. "We recovered it during the investigation," Carter explained. "Took a while to process through evidence, but it's yours now." Grandma held the necklace up to catch the light, the pearls glowing soft and warm. "I never thought I'd see this again." "We recovered quite a few items. Your charm bracelet should be returned next week, along with some other pieces." After Carter left, I helped Grandma with the necklace clasp, watching her transform as the familiar weight settled around her neck. It was more than jewelry. It was a connection to her mother, to her own history, to the person she'd been before institutions and family betrayals had tried to erase her past. "Take a picture," she said suddenly, "for the family album." I raised my camera and focused on her face, the lines that spoke of 8 decades of laughter and sorrow, the eyes that had seen her family fracture but still held hope for its healing, the small smile that suggested contentment was possible even after everything had fallen apart. The photo, when I developed it later, captured something I hadn't expected to see. Not just an elderly woman in her garden, but a survivor. Someone who had weathered the ultimate betrayal and emerged with her dignity intact, her capacity for joy undimmed. As the sun set over Port Arthur, I sat in Grandma's garden and thought about the story that had brought us to this moment. The investigation had ended, justice had been served, and families had been reunited with stolen belongings. But the real story, the one about choosing truth over comfort, about finding courage in unlikely places, about the price and value of doing what's right, that story was still being written. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Morgan, my name is Susan Torres. I think my father's nursing home in Lewiston is stealing from residents. Can you help?" I looked at Grandma, peaceful among her roses, then back to my phone. "Yes," I typed. "I can help." There were more stories to tell, more fights to fight, more vulnerable people who needed someone to see what others preferred to ignore. It wasn't the career I'd planned, but it was the one I'd found. And sitting in that garden, watching my grandmother tend to plants that had survived displacement and neglect to bloom again, I knew it was exactly where I belonged. The last picture I took that day was of the harbor at sunset, the same view Grandma had watched from her window at Sunset Manor. But this time, it wasn't a scene of longing for something lost. It was a vista of possibility, stretching out toward a horizon where justice and dignity weren't just ideals, but realities worth fighting for. One story at a time. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.